Welcome back to Kardec Radio for Teens. For those of you who don't know, Kardec Radio for Teens is a place where teens can come together with other teens to learn about Spiritist teachings and topics in a way that makes more sense to us and is more relatable to us as teenagers in today's society. Last week, when we were reading the Spirits book together, we left off in the middle of, we were in the chapter titled Divine and Natural Law. So we were talking about this divine law, and in that we were talking about good and evil, and that's where we left off. So we'll pick up right there at question 640. Are those who do not do evil themselves, but who take advantage of the evil committed by others, culpable to the same degree? So here this question's asking, okay, so this person doesn't do evil things, but if something evil happens, they'll take advantage of that situation. So they're saying, are they still at the same level of degree of guilt and can take the blame kind of for doing something wrong? And the spirits answered, it is as if they themselves have committed it. Upon taking advantage of it, they participate
I'm Dia,
in it.
and this is Kardec Radio for
Perhaps
Teens.
they would have recoiled before the deed itself, but once it was done and they took advantage of it, it was because they approved of it and would have committed it themselves, could they have, or if they had been more daring. So, yes, just because you aren't doing you're not doing the evil thing, but if you partake in it and appreciate it and go along with it, then you're just as much at fault. And one common example that we see this a lot in is bullying. Because people think, okay, yeah, I'm not the one that's bullying, but also you're not doing anything to stop it. You're sitting there and going along with it and laughing and making fun of this person. So yeah, you're not the one doing the bullying, but standing and watching and laughing is still pretty much at fault. Because like they said here, you would have done it yourself if you were more daring, but you didn't do it yourself. So you're just as much at fault as the person who is actually bullying the other person. Question 641. Is the desire for evil as reprehensible as evil itself? So this question is quite simply asking, is the desire for evil as bad as doing something evil itself? So, okay, just because you didn't do something evil, if you have the desire for evil, that's pretty bad too, right? And the spirits answered, that depends. There is virtue in willing resisting the desire for evil if one desires to commit it, especially when there is a possibility of satisfying the desire. However, if it is only because the opportunity did not present itself, the person is culpable. So, of course, as we're evolving, we know that we're not at that perfect state yet. That's where we're getting to. So, yeah, you might have some desire towards evil, but resisting it and working against that and trying to fix that is fine. So we're still going to have that desire to evil, but if we can start resisting it and stopping it and doing something different and kind of pushing that away, then it's a kind of a good thing we're doing. We're working towards evolving ourselves. But if we have the desire to do evil and the only reason we don't do it is because the opportunity didn't show up, oh, I didn't bully anyone today, but only because I didn't see anyone that I could bully. So that doesn't mean that you wouldn't do it. If you were in that situation, you would have done it. So then you're equally as guilty. Question 642. In order to be pleasing to God and to ensure our future situation is enough simply not to do what is evil? So they're saying, so to please God and to improve our future situation, is it enough to not do evil? So can we just not do evil and that's good? And the spirits answered, no. All must do good to the best of their abilities, for all will answer for all the evil that has resulted from the good they left undone. So what that's meaning here is that, no, you don't just have to not do evil. You have to not do evil and then do good stuff. And that's the key part, because even say something happens because you didn't do anything good. Maybe you were supposed to do this good thing, but you didn't put that in place. So because that's not in place, something bad happened. Well, in that case, then that fault is going to go back to you and you're going to answer for that, because you shouldn't just have been standing there, oh, I'm not doing evil, so I'm doing good. No, you have to actually do the good things. Question 643. Are there persons who have no possibility of doing good because of their position? So are there people who are, let's say, like so low in the spirit hierarchy, or maybe even just a social hierarchy, that there's just no way that they could do any good? And the spirits answered, there are none who cannot do good. Only selfish persons never find an opportunity for doing so. It is enough to come in contact with others in order to do good, and everyday life offers such a possibility to whoever is not blinded by selfishness. Doing good does not only mean being charitable, but also being as useful as possible whenever your help is needed. So that's very important. Right there in the beginning, they say there's none who can't do good. So there's always something good, and maybe it's not something grand. Maybe you can only do good with helping your neighbor or doing something little, helping around the house, but doing something, there's always something little that you can do, that your help is needed, or even just a kind word or a kind smile. Even that is doing something good. So you can always do something. Question 644. Aren't the surrounding in which certain people live the main reason for many to involve themselves in vice and crime? So here they're saying, so isn't it like the place that people live that kind of forces them, or not forces them, but influences them to do these evil things? And the spirits answered, yes, but even then it is the result of a trial chosen by their spirit in the state of freedom. It wanted to expose itself to temptations in order to have the merit of resisting it. So yes, the surrounding area does influence you a lot. If you're in a more violent area, then you are going to be influenced to do all these things. And if you're not in a violent area, then you might not be confronted with these trials, so you don't really know if you would be evil or good in that situation, because those kind of situations don't happen where you live. But in the spirit world, we chose what kind of trials we wanted to go through. And that person, that spirit, wanted to say, okay, I want to go in that place so that when I resist it, I'll be improving myself if I can resist all these evil things that exist in this area. But say you come into a good area, which is fine, because maybe that's not the trial that you're working on right now. But if you're in a better area, then you don't know that you're completely good and would completely resist those evils, because you haven't been put in that situation yet. And of course, we all have to go through all the trials and all the tests, so we will get to that point eventually, but maybe that's just not what we're focusing on in this reincarnation. Question 645. When individuals are immersed in an atmosphere of vice, doesn't evil become almost an irresistible draw? So, if a person is in a place where there's just so much evil and so much crime and so much bad things, isn't it kind of like irresistible for them, or like you just have to, they're like drawn into it? And the spirits answered, draw, yes. Irresistible, no, because in the midst of such an atmosphere of vices, you can nonetheless find great virtue. There are spirits who have the strength to resist, and who have at the same time the mission of exerting a good influence on their fellow beings. So a draw, yes, so you might be drawn into these things. If you're surrounded by this all the time, there's going to be a heavy pull, like pulling you in towards these kind of things. But it's not irresistible, because you can resist it. And there are spirits who are resisting it, and along with resisting it, they're not just resisting it, but they're doing good so they can help their others and help themselves in that situation. Question 646. Does the merit of the good that one does depend on certain conditions? That is, are there different degrees of merit in doing good? So are there oh, you did a little good thing, or you did a big good thing? Like, are there different types of levels of how good what you did was? And the spirits answered, the merit lies in its difficulty. There is no merit in doing good if it takes no self-denial and if it costs nothing. God takes more notice of poor individuals who share their only piece of bread than the rich who only give what is superfluous to them. Jesus told you this in the parable of the widow's mite. So the credit you get for the good things that you did, it depends on how difficult it was. So maybe, you just gave a smile to someone, so that's not as big as doing something grand, but maybe that smile was all you had to give and you really truly meant it. Then it might have been a lot. It might have meant a lot more to you and to that other person, instead of just, unless you're a person that just smiles at everyone. Maybe a person who really is having a hard time and all they could do was give a smile. That meant a lot more to you who can give a million smiles to everyone. And also, like they said, there's no merit if there's no self-denial. Like, if they're doing something but they think still highly of themselves, or you're doing something good because you want people to say, oh, look, that person did something good. So now you're doing it for yourself and for your credentials, not actually helping these people. And also, if it costs nothing, and that doesn't mean you have to give $1 million and do all this thing, because and like they said here, there's poor individuals who will share their only piece of bread, which is much more valuable than a piece of bread to someone that's very rich. But there's so much. So when that poor person gives their only piece of bread, even though it might not cost a lot, in the way that they live, it does cost a lot, and it is a big part of their living. But if there's a rich person who says, I'll give all of this bread, but they're only giving all this bread because it's all extra, and they already have what they need. So that isn't as, let's say, amazing or as good as that person who's giving maybe the only thing they have. So it's not that we have to go giving a million things or the most expensive things or the best things, but we have to give truly from ourselves, and something that maybe means something to us or is valuable to us, but we're willing to share it and help other people as well. Just giving our leftovers to people isn't at that same effect. And okay, maybe there's some situations where if there was a big party and you have extra food and you do give those leftovers to like a homeless shelter or something, that's great, that's fine. It's fine to give your leftovers, but to understand that you're helping these people and not doing it for yourself, not doing it to make you seem good, but you're giving with the intent of helping people, and that's what's really important. It's important in these situations to be thinking about others before yourself, and that's when it will truly value much more. And then we're on to the next section, which is titled The Divisions of Natural Law. Question 647. Is the entire law of God contained in Jesus' maximum of loving one's neighbor? So they're saying, the entire law of God, God's law, is it all within Jesus's saying of love one's neighbor, love one's neighbor as oneself, and love God above all? So is it all in that? And the Spirit answered, this maximum certainly reaffirms all humankind duties towards each other, but it is necessary to show them its application, because otherwise they will neglect such duties, as they in fact do nowadays. Moreover, natural law covers all life circumstances, and this particular maximum only refers to only one of its aspects. People need precise rules. General and overly vague perceptions leave too many doors open to interpretation. So what they're saying here is that, yes, this is definitely a great rule that Jesus brought to us, to love one neighbor as ourselves and to love God above all, because if we do that, then we'll always be doing the right thing, doing the best thing, because that's what God wants us to do, and that's how we show our love to God. And also, if we're helping others or loving others as ourselves, then we're being nice to people and helping people and caring for people. So that is a big aspect of it. But we also, as they said here, we need to show people the application of this, because people are like, okay, great, I know this sentence, but then they don't do anything with it. So people also need to be shown how to apply this to their lives and how to have more precise rules, because the way it is now, it kind of leaves it open to a lot of interpretation, and then people make of it what they want, and then it doesn't come to the thing like we do today. A lot of people know this law, yet nothing's ever happened with it, and no one really goes by it. We just know the saying. So it's important to have more precise rules and cover more things, so that more people can follow it and be able to understand exactly what they need to do. Question 648. What do you think of the division of natural law in 10 parts, covering the laws of worship, labor, reproduction, preservation, destruction, society, progress, equality, liberty, and lastly, the law of justice, love, and charity? So they're saying, so what do you think if we split up the divine law into these 10 parts? And the spirits answered, the division of God's law into 10 parts comes from Moses and covers all the circumstances of life, which is the essential point. You may follow that division, although, like other classification systems, it does not contain anything absolute. Such systems always depend on the point of view from which a subject is considering. The last law is the most important, since through it humans can advance further in the spiritual life. It sums up all the others. So what they're saying here is that, yes, this 10 division goes back all the way to Moses, and it covers every circumstances in life, which is great, which is the essential point, that we want to cover all aspects of life. But of course we need to know that this isn't absolute, and there's other great things that we should do and follow that aren't exactly written here. And also, of course, that each topic is kind of taken at someone's point of view. So someone might see it as one way, while other people might see it as another. But the most important part to keep in mind here is that the last law, the law of love and charity and justice, that is a law that can help us the most advance in our lives. And also it sums up all the others, because if we're loving, then we're going to do good things in all the other areas. So now we reach the end of that chapter, and the next chapter we're going to go more into these laws that were just described. So this first one is the law of worship. And so we're going to be so the first section we're going to be talking about is the purpose of worship. Question 649. What does worship entail? So what does this word even mean? What does it want us to do? And the spirits answered, worship is lifting up on the thought toward God. Through worship, the soul draws nearer its creator. So worship is lifting our thoughts up towards God, thinking about God, and having this connection. And that connection brings us closer to God. Question 650. Is worship the result of an innate sentiment or the product of education? So, do we worship things because of like a feeling we have inside to worship, or is it just like the product of people just telling us to worship things? And the spirits answered, an innate sentiment, that is, of the divinity. The awareness of their weaknesses lead humans to bow before the one who can protect them. So it's like a feeling that we have inside of us to worship. It's not like someone has to teach us how. It's just this feeling. And we see throughout history, even when we learn in like social studies class, that people have been worshiping things since the beginning of Earth, like we study. And sure, they've been worshiping different types of things, but they were worshiping. They had this insight, this concept, this feeling in them that they were something greater than them, and they were gonna worship that, look up to them. And it's the awareness that we are not the biggest thing in the universe. We're not the best thing in the universe. So we know this weakness, and we know that there's someone that's much more powerful and grand and perfect that can protect them. And that's how humans think, and that's why they've always been worshipped. They've had this feeling to worship, because if I'm weak, then I know there's someone grander that can help me, and that is God. Question 651. Have there ever been people devoid of all sentiment of worship? So has there ever been a person that has no feeling of worship, that doesn't want to do any of that? And the Spirit said, no, because there have never been atheistic people. All of them understand that there is a supreme being above them. So what he's saying is that no, there's never been anyone that doesn't have this feeling of worship, because everyone understands that there is something above them. And maybe it's not exactly God, but maybe they believe in some sort of light or some sort of power or something that's above them. They understand that there's something more supreme above them. And even maybe people who call themselves atheistic, deep down they do have this feeling. And maybe, right, because maybe they're not considering God directly, but maybe they're thinking of a greater energy and light source. So maybe they're just looking at it in a different point of view, but they still are believing in something more supreme. Question 652. Does worship have its source in natural law? And the Spirits answered, it is part of natural law because it is the result of an innate sentiment in humankind. That is why we find it among people, albeit expressions in different forms. So this is part of natural law because it's something that everyone feels. It's a sentiment, a feeling that we all have as human beings, and we can find it in all people. And although it's going to be in different forms, we'll still find it everywhere in all people. And now we're on to the next part of this chapter, which is titled Outward Worship Forms. So, forms of worship. Question 653. Does worship require outward expression? So, worshiping someone, does it require outward expression, like talking out loud, or is it internal? And the Spirits answered, true worship comes from the heart. In all your actions, always remember that the Lord is watching you. So, in all of our actions, that God can see everything we're doing and is with us all the time. So it comes from our heart, and we don't need to do anything, because He's watching us all the time. So the best way to worship that is to do good things all the time. But if we're not there yet, then we don't need to do something grand or extravagant to try and worship. We can just do it from the heart. And then there's a second part to this question, and it says, are outward worship forms useful nonetheless? So even though it's from the heart, is it still good to have these outward worships? And the Spirits answered, yes, if they are not vain pretense. They are always useful for setting a good example. But those who practice such forms of worship only out of affection and vanity, bellying their appearance of piety, has set a bad example rather than a good one, and they do more harm than they can imagine. So, yes, if you want to do this outward worship, like in a public situation or something like that, that's great and that's fine, because you're setting a good example for maybe people who don't know how to worship yet. You're setting a good example, and if you truly mean it. But if you're just doing it, if you're just going to a place of worship to worship so people see you, if you're doing it for yourself so you can look good, then that's a bad example. That's doing exactly the opposite of what we want. Question 654. Does God have any preferences for those who worship in this or that manner? So does God care in which way we worship? And the Spirits answered, God prefers those who sincerely worship from the bottom of their heart, doing good and avoiding evil. To those who they think honor God through ceremonies that do not render them any better than their neighbor. So God wants those who are truly worshiping from the bottom of their heart, and they're doing good and instead of evil. And maybe there's ones that think they're honoring God through some ceremony, but maybe they're still doing evil things, and maybe they don't truly mean it. But God likes the ones that are truly meaning it and truly giving it their all. Then it continues, all are brothers and sisters, children of the same God, and God calls all those who follow the divine establishment laws. Whatever may be the form in which they express themselves. So God does call all of those, and maybe you express it in different ways, but that's okay. He accepts that we can express our love in different ways. Then it continues. Those who only put on appearances of piety are hypocrites. Those are whom worship only for pretense that is contradicted by their actual conduct set a bad example. So those who are just doing it just to look good, or maybe they did something bad, so now they're trying to look good, they're setting a bad example. They're doing the wrong thing. We shouldn't be doing it for us. We should be doing it because we truly mean it. And then it continues. Those who profess to worship Christ, but who are proud, envious, and jealous, who are hard and unforgiving towards others, but who are ambitious for worldly things, I declare you that their religion is on their lips only, and not in their heart. God, who sees everything, will say, those who know the truth are 100 times guiltier of the evil they do than the unknowing madman in the desert, and they will be treated accordingly on Judgment Day. If a blind person passing you accidentally knocks you down, you forget about it. But if this is a person whose sight is perfect, you rightly take offense. So what they're saying is that there's some who are worshiping Jesus, but they're proud and envious and jealous, and they have all these things, and they're saying all these good things, but they're not doing any of them. So that they're saying their religion, their worship, it's on their lips. It's not in their heart. It's just what they're saying. It's just coming out of them, but not from their heart. And they said that here they're saying what this quote means is that when they said those who know the truth are 100 times guiltier of the evil than the unknowing nomad in the desert. So if there is someone in the desert who maybe not doing anything bad, but he doesn't know how to do something, but you who knows this and who knows the right thing to do, and you're doing wrong, you're 100%, you're 1,000 times what they say guiltier than that person who doesn't know. So say you were introduced to Jesus' teachings, yet you still go against them. You're a lot guiltier than the person who still hasn't heard about Jesus' teachings yet, because they live somewhere that they haven't heard about this. So they aren't doing it because they haven't learned it yet. They don't know about it yet. And eventually they will get there. But that's not really their fault. They're just still discovering it. But you know it and you have it, and you're not doing anything about it. You're not putting that into practice. So that person will be so much more guiltier than the person who just simply actually does not know. And it's like saying, if a blind person accidentally bumps into us, we won't think anything of it. We're like, oh, they're blind, they didn't see us. But if someone that has clear vision bumps into us, we'll be more offended. And that's exactly the way God will feel. You had this clear vision, you had all this information, yet you did nothing. And meanwhile, this person didn't have the vision, so yeah, it was a little hard for them to be able to do anything. So us who we have this information, especially us who have this doctrine with us, we need to start practicing it, because we can't just let it go on our lips and go in one ear and out the other. And then it continues. So do not ask if there is one particular form of worship that is the most acceptable, since that would be like asking whether it is more pleasing to God to be worshipped in one language rather than another. I will say to you once more, hymns do not reach God except through the door of the heart. So what he's saying is, there isn't a certain way to worship. It doesn't matter what language it is. It doesn't matter. And sometimes different religions have maybe different, it may seem like they have different sort of things that they're worshiping, but in the end, they're all worshiping this supreme being, this God. And maybe just their culture represents it in a different way. But the worships that will actually be effective are those from the heart. God's not going to hear the ones that you were just talking and not truly meaning. So that's where we'll leave off today. But before we leave off, I'd like to read our message from the Daily Book of Positive Quotations by Linda Pacone for today's date, February 13th. Sharing with friends. Friendship makes prosperity more shining and lessens adversity by dividing and sharing it. When something wonderful happens to us, it may not seem real until we can tell our friends about it. Their happiness for us deepens and intensifies our pleasure. When something bad happens to us, we search out our friends for comfort and understanding and assurance. Their sympathy eases our pain and gives us hope. Knowing how much friendship means to us, how can we be better friends to others in the times of prosperity and adversity? I will be the best friend I can be to people who bring so much into my life. I'm Bia, and this is Cardiac Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening. This has been Cardiac Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening.